Hi, and good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our weekly Sanctions and Trade Compliance broadcast. As you might have seen on LinkedIn, we have been promoting this broadcast as an EU sanctions update in anticipation of the newest round of sanctions by the G7. They have met last week in Japan to discuss new sanctions against Russia, and we would like to give you an update today on those sanctions, especially the EU sanctions. Today with us, I have an external speaker who I'm very thankful for, who's volunteering to speak on the latest EU sanctions. Pierre, he just disappeared. He's coming online now. Hi, Pierre. Thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
I just welcomed everybody who joins us through LinkedIn. We had over 100 registrations, which is a new record and shows how important EU sanctions against Russia are at the moment. And we hope to be able to provide you with something valuable today, despite the sanctions have not been released yet, but just discussed. And this is what we will do today. We will discuss the proposed sanctions by the EU. Pierre, thanks a lot for volunteering to do this update for us. And please introduce yourself, and then we can begin with the presentation.
Indeed, thank you very much, Alex. So my name is Pierre Simon. I will be giving a short update today about at least the EU bit of the new sanctions against Russia in relation to the Ukraine war. A little bit of a background. I've been in this field for over 15 years already. Lately focusing more on sanctions and broadly, of course, in financial crime compliance. And I think everyone has been following a lot of the developments since February last year on the sanctions against Russia. So I think a very interesting topic, a lot of new developments constantly. And for today, at least, the focus will be on the proposed 11 package against Russia. Let's look maybe now at some of the topics to be discussed today. So one of the main, there are the slides, if you can go to the next one. So a couple of topics. First, before we dive into the proposed sanctions, new sanction package against Russia, short recap on the EU sanctions, looking at, all the 10 packages, focusing a little bit on where did we start, where are we now, and where do we expect to be when this package will be actually introduced and implemented. So let's start first with the EU sanctions timeline. Can you go to the next slide? So as you can see, we had a lot of developments since February 2022. Of course, it didn't start then. Some of the sanctions, of course, were already in place since 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea. But actually the number of sanctions were still pretty limited up until the beginning, the midst of February 2022, where some statements were made by the president of Russia. And of course, we know that the first package actually was introduced back in the 23rd of February 2022. What I would like to do is to walk you quickly through the main developments of all these packages. And after that, we will focus more on the proposal, or at least what we expect to be in the proposal. So if we look at the first package, then we can see that, as mentioned at the end of February 2022, some of the main pillars or triggers of imposing this first package was, of course, the recognition of Russia of the non-government controlled area of Donetsk and Luhansk. And this actually, and also the deployment of troops in the region. So the Council of the European Union responded by adopting the first set of sanctions. These sanctions aimed to address some key points. The first one being restricting the Russian state and the government's access to the EU's capital and financial markets but also services to prevent the financing and escalatory and aggressive policies. Secondly, managing economic relations between the two non-government controlled regions and the European Union to ensure that those responsible for undermining or threatening Ukraine's territorial integrity and the independence face clear economic consequences for their illegal and aggressive actions. And thirdly, targeting individuals and organizations involved in activities that undermined or posed a threat to Ukraine's territorial integrity and independence. And especially the third one, we have seen that there was a lot of focus on those individuals and organizations that have been sanctioned. So looking at the first package, the initial list of sanctioned individuals and organizations consisted of a total of 555 individuals and 52 organizations. If we look then at the second package, which followed pretty closely on February 25th, 2022, this included several individual and economic measures. The first one being financial sector sanctions, which were implemented to restrict Russia's access to the major capital markets. Back at that day, those days, these sanctions targeted 70% of the Russian banking market, as well as key state-owned companies, including those in the defense sector. Secondly, the energy sector, where sanctions were imposed to prohibit the sale, supply, transfer, or export of specific goods and technologies related mostly to oil refining to Russia. And restrictions were also introduced on the provision of related services. Thirdly, transport sector sanctions were implemented to ban the sale of aircraft, spare parts, and equipment to Russian airlines. And these measures aimed to degrade a key sector of Russia's economy and disrupt the country's connectivity. Fourthly, the technology sector sanctions imposed further restrictions on the export of dual-use goods and technology. Additionally, export of certain goods and technology that could contribute to Russia's technological enhancement in the defense and security sector were restricted. And the fifth and the final main measure in the second package were the visa policy sanctions, which were implemented, removing privileged access to the EU for diplomats, related groups, and also business people associated with Russia. And with the inclusion of these measures, the list of sanctioned individuals and organizations reached a total of 654 individuals and 52 organizations. So we saw a small increase of individuals mostly. If we look at the third package, then we see again an addition of some organizations and individuals added to the sanction list. But also what we saw, which was really new, was the inclusion of several restrictive measures, like adding key Russian banks to exclude them from the SWIFT system. This took a lot of discussions, as we remember back then, to do this. And actually, with the third package, this became reality. And as you know, of course, the SWIFT system, which is the dominant global financial messaging system, had, of course, also a big impact on access to the global financial markets for Russian banks. Also, the package prohibited investment in projects co-financed by the Russian Direct Investment Fund and the provision of euro-denominated banknotes to Russia. But also, and this was also pretty unique, state-owned media outlets like Russia Today and Sputnik were prohibited from broadcasting in the European Union. If you look at the fourth package, we can see that the sanctions against Russia included a full prohibition on transactions with certain Russian state-owned enterprises, except for state-owned banks, but also railways and a maritime shipping register. EU agencies were prohibited from providing financial rating services to Russian companies. And also the package included a ban on imports on iron and steel products covered by the EU safeguard measures. And also one of the focuses in the fourth package was the export of luxury goods, which was prohibited as well. And furthermore, a couple of individuals, 15 and 9 organizations, including oligarchs, business elites linked to the Kremlin, but also companies in military and defense sector, and those involved in disinformation, were added to the already pretty long list of sanctioned individuals and organizations. If we then look at the fifth package, we saw a more focus on the import ban on all forms of Russian coal and targeted export bans on various items such as quantum computing, advanced semiconductors, machinery, transportation, and chemicals. But also some other products like cement, rubber goods, spirits, including vodka, high-end seafood, including caviar, and many other measures, including anti-circumvention measure on potash imports from Belarus. If we then look at the sixth package, then we see that the sanctions against Russia included an embargo on crude and refined oil imports, allowing spot market transactions and execution of existing contracts for a limited period. Also inclusion of 3 new Russian banks in relation to the SWIFT ban, further isolating the Russian financial sector. Then if we move on to the seventh package, we see that the EU sanctions against Russia included a ban on the import of gold originating from Russia and exported to the European Union, but also to any non-EU country, with an exemption for personal use jewelry. And then the eighth package involved sanctioning the additional individuals and organizations involved in Russia's occupation, annexation, and also the sham referenda in Ukraine. But also import restrictions were imposed on various Russian products, and also the implementation of the G7 oil price cap was initiated. The eighth package included restrictions on state-owned enterprises, tightened regulation of crypto assets, and also expanded limitations on business services, and introduced measures to deter sanction circumvention. If we then look at the ninth package, and this is already at the end of 2022, we have seen an addition of nearly 200 individuals and organizations to the list of people with frozen assets, but also export restrictions were introduced on sensitive technologies contributing to Russia's military capabilities. And also severe export restrictions were extended to 168 additional Russian organizations linked to the military-industrial complex. And then the final package, more lately, which was exactly a year after the implementation, or actually the publication of the first package, at the end of February 2023, the 10th package. This included the addition of approximately 120 individuals and entities to the sanction list, including Russian decision makers, military leaders, and proxy authorities in Ukraine. And it also introduced export restrictions on sensitive dual-use technologies and bans on goods easily redirected to support the Russian war effort. The package covered EU exports worth 11.4 billion euros and imposed import bans on specific Russian goods. Additionally, measures were taken in the financial sector, enforcement and anti-circumvention, and of course bans or further bans on Russian disinformation outlets, among others. So if we just summarize shortly, where do we stand now with all these 10 packages? So as of the 5th of May 2023, there have been a total of 1,680 designations related to Ukraine, and encompassing 1,472 individuals and 208 entities. And this is, of course, limited only to the territorial integrity sanctions in relation to the war in Ukraine. But also we have seen some designations in the Belarus sanction regimes. So having summarized the 10 packages, if you move on to the next slide, then I would like to have a look at the main topic of today's broadcast, which is the proposed 11th package of EU sanctions against Russia. So, as mentioned already by Alexander at the beginning, currently there is no official publication yet on the proposed package. There's still a lot of discussions that need to take place. But what we do know is that on 9th of May, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, was present during Europe Day in Kiev, in Ukraine. And during her speech, she announced at least that there is a proposal for an 11th package. And she provided some insights into what might be in this new 11th package. So what we know, of course, is that the focus of the 11th round of sanctions is aimed at closing loopholes and addressing circumvention. We have seen, of course, a lot of discussions and developments in regards to circumvention of sanctions, using also third countries. And this is definitely something that is part of the discussion currently. But also the ability to target companies and countries aiding Russia in evading penalties. So if we look a little bit closer, we can move to the next slide. Then what are actually the key measures expected to be included in the proposed package? Well, the first measure is the ban of shadow entities involved in circumventing EU sanctions. Chinese companies are expected to be designated for aiding Russia for the first time. Actually, the European Commission has apparently proposed blacklisting 7 Chinese companies accused of supplying banned components to Russia's military sector. And again, this is, of course, still apparent and a proposal because the list has yet to be officially confirmed. But if you look, and we've seen last week, of course, that there was a G7 meeting that took place where the G7 countries also try to align as much as possible on sanctions against Russia, further sanctions. And we have seen a publication in the United States of additional sanctions against Russia, where they did sanction some Chinese companies. So it is in line of expectations for the European Union as well. But also other entities from countries like the United Arab Emirates, Uzbekistan, Syria, and Iran may also be included. The second measure focuses on expanding the restricted item list for transit shipments. The new shipments to be covered include advanced technology products and aircraft. If we then move on to the next slide, then the third measure actually introduces a new tool to combat circumvention. So the European Commission proposes restrictions on exports to specific third countries to prevent items from ending up in Russia through circumvention. The fourth measure focuses on further restrictions on the import, transport, and supply of Russian oil. The goal is to intensify the existing restrictions on Russian oil. And then if we look at the fifth measure, that's the prohibition of access to EU ports and locks for vessels in breach of restrictions related to seaborne crude oil and petroleum products. And then also finally, vessels tampering with navigation systems during transportation will also face the prohibition. Then moving on to the next slide. So what are now the next steps for the proposed package? So what we know, at least, of the proposals is that the European Commission has already sent the proposal to the EU member states. Currently, the approval of all 27 EU member states is necessary for the adoption of the proposed measures, and further discussions and negotiations will take place. Once approved, the additional measures will enter into force. So this is to summarize at least what we know now about the proposed 11 sanction package. Alex, back to you.
Thanks, Pierre. Since this has not been officially published yet, can we expect the legal act to be published this week, since we've seen the US already published something on OFAC's website, and the UK and Canada, I believe, also published official regulations already? The probability is high that we will see the legal acts this week. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a highly likely probability that we will see it pretty soon, probably already this week. What we have seen, and I think that's also an interesting development, is that if you look at the 10th package, was actually published on a Saturday. So it would not surprise me if it's not published during the work week, that maybe in the weekend we will see some publications there. So I think definitely something to look forward to whenever there's a new publication or press release in the upcoming days.
Yeah. Great. I don't think we have to dive deeper into the proposed sanctions because they are just proposed. And unfortunately, we cannot state facts today of what has actually been prohibited yet. And therefore, we can expect something to be published soon, and then have a live broadcast for you prepared with the new prohibitions on another Monday. So if you would like to ask us some questions, you can do that through the comment section now, and we should receive your comments a couple of seconds later. So we'll just take a couple of seconds and see if anyone has a question. In the meantime, I can tell you about ACSS next webinars, which we have prepared for the next couple of weeks. In a bit more than a week, we have a webinar entitled Risk Assessments and Their Impact on Exports and Sanctions Compliance Programs, sponsored by KPMG. This webinar is available for all, and everyone can join, even if you're not an ACSS member. on the 15th of June, we will have a webinar called Looking at Sanctions from a Different Angle, which will be a really interesting webinar, only for ACSS members. And then on July 13th, we have Cybersecurity for Sanctions Compliance Staff, also for ACSS members only. I haven't seen any comments coming through. I believe everyone is still awaiting the legal acts to be published and therefore cannot really discuss specific sanctions that have actually been imposed now. But thanks for joining us. I hope we could give you a good overview of the past sanctions packages, the whole timeline. Thank you, Pierre, for preparing the presentation and leading us through the timeline. We've seen 10 packages in a bit more than a year and await the 11th package of EU sanctions. Probably will be published soon. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Pierre, for your time and your expertise. I hope we could help all of you who are watching with a couple of new insights and get you ready for the new measures of the EU. Hope to see you again during the next LinkedIn broadcast every Monday at 9 a.m. New York time. Thanks, everyone, and have a great week.